Force One.
Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Pod Force One and our topics for the day. We've got Eric Elder and special guest Kyle Thompson.
Hey, what's going on, guys?
Dear friend
Hey,
of
what's
ours.
up?
How are you guys?
Buddy had to step out, so he won't be with us today. But
Buddy had been away from his wife for about a week, so I think he was jonesing to see.
And I'll cut him some slack.
Yeah, on that at least.
So today
that.
we want to talk about the Maryland man, Mr. Garcia, that was being carried by U.S. senators and House members going down to El Salvador, trying to bring him back. And boy, I bet they're eating some major crow now.
But before we do, I'm going to do some copyright infringement and ask a trivia question.
Okay.
I'm going to play a song. All of you have heard it since you've been children, but I bet neither one of you will know the name of the song.
Uh-oh.
But you'll go, I know this song.
Charlie Brown.
It's Schroeder. Schroeder plays this.
Yeah, it's a Charlie Brown.
Yeah.
What's the name of the song?
Well, shit. Handle it.
I'm going to stop playing it so we don't get tagged on copyright. That will fall under fair use.
I don't have a clue. Schroeder's
Who plays piano in...
Schroeder.
Okay. Who carries the blanket?
Linus.
Linus and Lucy is the name of that song.
No kidding.
No one knows the name of that
Never
song.
knew that.
Yep.
Okay.
Well, that's crazy.
I thought of all people that knows these random facts, you
I'm
would be
actually,
one.
I'm actually disappointed that I didn't know that, to be honest with you, and I'm going to feel terrible about myself the rest.
That's a good trivia question. So back to Maryland man that started out, he's just a dad. He's just here, he's a good tax-paying.
Right.
What's he got? He's got a hold. He's been deported numerous times.
He has a deportation hold.
Yeah, and he's got a hold because some gang back in El Salvador says they would take him out. Of course, if they say they're going to take him out, does that mean that he's actually part of MS-13? Because they're battling in El Salvador.
Well, the whole thing you hear, and I'm glad we got Kyle in here today because he can explain this better than we ever could.
Well, that's scary.
It's the whole due process.
Yeah.
Everybody says he deserves due process. He deserves due process. And then you got the fact that you said that he's in fear of his life over a gang that's going to take him out. I know if you put me in a prison, a gang ain't taking me out. They're not going to know my name.
Yeah.
Because I'm not affiliated with the gang.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my thing.
But he apparently is affiliated with the gang, even though they say he's not. And, he's a good father, even though he's beat his wife. She's filed
Multiple
at least
times.
two complaints
At least two that we know about.
And they just released the audio from her court hearing where he's done everything but end her.
And earlier in the week they released the video from Tennessee State Patrol that showed him that he was human trafficking.
Human trafficking.
That's
The Tennessee, somebody in that area said you can't hold him.
Let him go.
Yeah, let him go. And he had 6 or 8 people in the car.
I think there were 8 people in the car.
No clothes, nothing but
Asked him.
toothbrush and toothpaste.
Toothbrush and toothpaste. And it was really funny if you watch the video. They asked each of them what address was their home address, and they gave his address. But they had and they were coming from Texas to Maryland. And when they, one of the state troopers walked up to the younger state trooper, this is the first time he had ever had this, the guy who actually pulled him over, he said, "You know what we have here, right?" And he goes, I think I know what we have. He says, "I bet if you check their pockets, all they have is toothbrush and toothpaste in their pockets." Right. And sure enough, when they checked, they had toothbrush and toothpaste. But the thing about that is that this was a situation where you clearly had human trafficking, and it should have been picked up and taken care of at that point by federal officials. And when whether it was ICE or the FBI down in that area, they let this go, and you have to consider the fact that none of those people had any identification. None of them could say where they came from or where they were going, and they were going to go do construction. Is all they knew, and they had actually put in an extra bench seat in the back of the vehicle to get 3 more people in it.
Oh wow!
And so that that right there would, should have been enough. But then you add to the fact that this guy had beat his wife multiple times, that he had multiple charges for not just basic traffic offenses, but also,
Right. Senator Kennedy said in a hearing last week that Garcia had appeared before 17 different judges in his times in the United States.
Yeah. And normally you would think that would be the due process, right? And I think the problem, it's not a problem. Let me give you the two spheres of thought here.
Not a problem, but a misconception.
Misconception, I think, because what the two schools of thought are, and what you'll always hear from people is they will say, well, the Fifth Amendment and the 14th Amendment say all people,
Right.
have a right to due process for everyone.
Can you explain that, Kyle? Because what the Constitution says, people or persons.
Yeah, it says all. It says all people.
And so now they're trying to interpret the meaning
Yeah,
of what they meant.
yeah. So I think that what you have to understand is that when the Constitution was created and the Bill of Rights were passed in the late 1700s, you didn't have a lot of individuals that were coming over into a country without attempting to do it the correct way when there were borders set up. And I know people will say, well, you didn't have a southern border and you didn't have a western border, but we already had places set up very early on as ports of entry where people would come in and they would have papers. And of course, in the early 1900s, late 1800s, early 1900s, we had Ellis Island, and we had those stories of people that came in. And then essentially from late 1920s, around 1930, all the way into the 1960s, we had zero immigrants that came in this country. We locked the country down.
Correct.
We were at war. We were concerned about who was coming in and out of the country, and of course, people didn't raise. People weren't saying, "Oh, we need to all the huddled masses to come into the United States." Right?
You racist.
Right. Exactly. And now we have this school of thought that says, well, anybody that comes onto our shore, well, they're entitled to everything that's under the Constitution. You have the other side of the argument that says, wait a second. Why should we as a country spend millions of dollars, and that's exactly what it will cost, millions of dollars and many, many years to give one person the right to go all the way up to the United States Supreme Court to remove them from the country?
Talking about Garcia. Right?
and others like him that they want to use as these examples.
Yeah, let me. So what I'm thinking and what I've been sharing is there's 14 to 20 million. Everybody, all our legislators agree to those numbers. 11 to 20 million illegals in the country, illegal aliens as the federal government defines them. If the Maryland man gets his due process, which something Bill Clinton and Barack Obama did not adhere to.
Never did.
When they
Right.
deported over 15 million illegals during their terms. Of course, that didn't bother nobody
No.
then. But if the way the Democrats are doing it today, I think my theory, and of course I'm always throwing these wild theories out. My theory is if they bring him back, which is not going to happen, but if they bring him back and send him through the court system, the Democrats will want to do all 11 to 20 million people like that. And then when the day comes, and it will, when there's a Democrat president, a Democrat House, and a Democrat Senate, they'll just grant them blanket citizenship.
Well, and they've had that in the past. If you think about, when
Reagan did it.
when
About
you had
2 million people.
when you had Barack Obama in office, he had the opportunity to grant that.
And remember his moniker,
Deporter in chief. Biden had 2 years that he had all branches, and they didn't do that, and it makes you wonder why they didn't do it. But then they want to fight this fight now. But getting on to the due process aspect is one thing, and that's it's a noble thought. I don't believe that the Federalist Papers, who don't really talk a lot about due process, but I don't believe that the framers of the Constitution would ever have thought that someone coming over from, say, France or a country like, say, Brazil coming up to the United States, that they would have been granted the same rights as an individual that was born and raised in the United States. And of course, that there's a fine line now that we have, the term that's used a lot is anchor babies. If you have birthright citizens here, and so you have a little bit more of the muddying of the waters. But at the same time, if you use the what I believe would be their originalist thought, there's no way that they would have thought that you would waste the exact same amount of time on deporting someone as you would determining if someone is guilty of murder. I mean, those are two totally different things in my book. But be that as it may, Kilmar Abrego Garcia received not one but 2 orders of deportation.
Correct.
He was ordered to be deported, and in that proceeding, the judge said there was relevant information that would lead him to believe that it was more likely than not that he was a member of MS-13, one of the most violent gangs in the entire world. And I know that's we throw terms like the most violent out, and that people can think that's hyperbole, but these are people who cut heads off with chainsaws for people who just mess with the gang or say something wrong with them.
Don't they have to kill somebody to get in the gang?
Have blood in, blood out, right?
I know TDA's that.
Yeah. Mara Salvatrucha, while there's only 50,000 people associated as gang members, they have millions of people that they are affiliated with, including the Sinaloa cartel,
Right.
The Mexican mafia, all of these different organizations. So when they say, well, there's only 10,000 MS-13 members, well, there's a whole bunch of people who are associated with MS-13 that either haven't killed someone or haven't been in.
And they come this close to taking over El Salvador.
100%, and the way that President Bukele has taken over that country is nothing short of a miracle.
From the murder capital of the world
to the safest
country in the world.
And I think people miss that point when they say, well, there's only 10,000 people here, but the Southern Poverty Law Center says that there's 20,000 white supremacists in the United States. Well, okay, we understand that, but there's a difference between a transnational drug gang that murders people on a regular basis as opposed to a bunch of idiots that post things online and say stupid things. And this is a very, very violent gang. And this guy was not only an associate, there is relevant and very dependable information that he was, and evidence that he has not only been initiated into the gang, but he was a shot caller for that gang in the Maryland area.
Correct.
Then he appeals that. His attorneys appeal it. It goes to the appellate division of the immigration court, and they uphold it and affirm the decision and say this guy can be deported anywhere in the world, but he can't be sent to El Salvador because there's a gang that wants to kill him. So this guy has not only had his due process, he's had it twice, and is able to be removed, and they haven't done so. And I think that's the thing that everyone misses. He's removed now.
Yeah,
and he ain't coming back.
now.
I don't care what anybody says. He's not coming back.
He is not coming back.
Yeah, I mean, you had 2 courts say, get him out of here.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, it wasn't like one person looked at some sketchy evidence and said, yeah, I just don't want this guy here. I mean, you had two sets of
two sets of eyes that have taken a look at it. And this guy was on the radar. I mean, so you can say the other thing that people say is, well, he was sent incorrectly. He shouldn't. It was an administrative error.
Yeah.
Only one person in the entire history of the universe has ever said that he was sent on an administrative error, and that was an individual who was working at the Justice Department, who was arguing the case in front of this district court, this Judge Boasberg or whoever it was that made this decision, and that particular individual has been let go because that information wasn't true. It was not an administrative error. They sent him, and they sent him where they wanted to send him, and just because one person said he can't be sent to El Salvador, the reason for that was, as you said earlier, as we were talking about this, that gang that he couldn't go back to, that gang's eliminated.
Yeah,
so the issue's done.
Well, it makes you wonder, on a point on MS-13, people say, well, there's only X number of members. Do you know? I mean, do we really know?
Right.
I mean, if you're not a member of MS-13, high up in the rankings, can you really say how many of them are there? And on top of that, to your point of all the associated people, is people are underestimating the reach of MS-13.
Oh yeah,
You know,
unbelievable.
We always see these movies on TV that, like, I can get you even in prison.
Right.
The connections and the ability that these people have. There's a bunch of crappy people in the world that will take you out in a heartbeat, but for whatever reason, they either aren't or have not yet made it. As a member of MS-13, doesn't mean that there's not 3 times as many people out there.
Didn't Louisville just make a big arrest of 2 different cartel gangs in Louisville?
Yeah, and
Guns, drugs, money, everything.
And let me break it down for the folks in Kentucky and how this affects us here in the Bluegrass State. In Frankfort alone, Frankfort has one of the highest drug overdose rates year over year in the entire country. It is the highest per capita in Kentucky. And then when you expand that out, there's only one state that's worse than us, and that's West Virginia. So, if you consider that, we are at the epicenter of this. And the way that individuals are getting fentanyl and the way that they get heroin and the way they get cocaine is through these channels of these drug cartels. And MS-13 was set up in the 80s in Los Angeles. And the whole point of MS-13 was to protect Honduran citizens that came into Los Angeles from other gangs, right? So clearly they are able to do that well enough that they've lasted.
Out as a prison gang.
It started out in the early 80s as an individual gang that started out in the streets of LA, but when it moved into the prisons, that's where it exploded.
And that's where the 18th Street Gang started also, and they also became an international gang, and they were the ones that wanted to take out Garcia.
Right, and of course
they don't exist in El Salvador anymore.
They do exist in CCOT.
They're inside of there
in the prison,
and they still exist in California.
They do, but what happens is they go to areas, and I've always said this. I even said this, years ago, is that the gangs have figured out something that the state of Kentucky hasn't figured out, and that's business development, economic development. They are in places where they can move drugs very, very quickly. Louisville and Lexington, Kentucky, are 2 of the greatest places to move drugs because you have I-75 and I-64, the 2 most traveled interstate highways in the eastern United States.
I-75 got some kind of drug moniker.
They do now. But you have
Michigan to Florida,
and because of the pill industry that happened in the early 2000s, you were involved in that when you were in the sheriff's department.
Yeah.
But what you have is these are the groups that are protecting the individuals that come across. And that's huge. If you remove those individuals, you're going to protect places like Maryland. So, we talk about the Maryland mother who was killed, mother of 5 that Van Hollen, maybe had one small press conference. Maybe. And he didn't do it.
Did she say that he never reached out to her?
Never reached out, nothing of that nature. But so this is the hill that we want to die on, that they want that they want to use this guy as their poster boy for going out and protecting all the other individuals. And I think anytime you go down that slippery slope that this is the guy that he's the one, they're always going to dig something else up. But we didn't just find out that this guy didn't pay his taxes or something, not that bad. This guy's a violent human. He beat his wife
in front of the children.
In front of the children.
In front of the children.
And her sister called the second time because she's terrified for her life.
Right.
I'm worried for that woman's safety. Now she's come out and said, I'm not, I didn't mean that. We were in the throes of COVID. He was real upset. That's why he beat me and all these things. And honestly, I think she's terrified. I think she's terrified for her life. I worry about, her safety from this point forward, a mysterious death or something, or, she goes missing, because this is a violent gang. I mean, I've studied this for years, but one of the things you'll see is it doesn't matter if there's 1 or there's 50,000. They are a cancer, and they will do everything they can to protect their interests, just like all gangs do. But this is a transnational organization, the Sinaloa cartel. I mean, El Chapo. We've heard of El Chapo, right? I mean, that's the Sinaloa cartel. I mean, they're buddies. These guys work together,
right?
And so I think that's something.
Like you said, they're getting and they have been constantly improving since the 80s, but their marketing skills are great.
Oh, they're fantastic.
They prey on individuals who from broken homes, or they're poor or whatever. They give them money, they give them stuff, and they bring them into a life of protection and whatever they want they can get.
So it's not hard for them to recruit people. And like you said, it's blood in, blood out.
Do you
Once
think-
you're in,
do
you're
you-
always in.
Do you think somebody one day is going to snap and just start taking them out? They're going to harm an American family, and it's going to be the wrong American.
Well, but
It won't be an American that takes them out.
Here's the other
There's
thing.
too many of them.
They also
No, I mean just they go hunting for them.
Oh,
Like
maybe.
they go hunting for their victims on the street. You know, if they got somebody they put a target on, they go find them.
Well, they operate in large blue cities, and what I mean by blue cities, I'm talking about cities that have traditionally very strict gun laws, very strict laws against
Mostly sanctuary
self-defense.
cities.
Most are sanctuary cities, and so they know they can usually work with without any barriers.
like
and-
Aurora, Colorado.
Exactly, in places like that, and Denver, and then Louisville obviously is very
In
blue.
Lexington.
Lexington is run by blue populations. Like Kentucky's a little different because we do have self defense and castle doctrines to an extent, but places like Maryland, I mean, they can run without impunity there, without any problems at all. And so that issue of you hurt the wrong person, there's
Right.
more of them. And that are not getting taken down by local police because they are sanctuary cities, and they know that they're not dumb. They use Frankfurt, unfortunately, but Lexington and Louisville, they use those as uploading and offloading points for these drugs because we are the center of the Midwest where those 2 points lead, and right now they're winning. Unfortunately, we're making strides to get a little better, but. It's scary. And if you go after these individuals, it protects your communities because I'm not worried about them coming in and killing someone. I'm worried about them bringing fentanyl in and killing some more
Right.
people that we have in our town.
Well, I'm going to, Eric, you talked about the border,
Mm-hmm.
and
Before you get into that, I know where you're going with that.
okay,
We talk about another thing. We talk about the interstates coming in and out, and we are kind of unique here in Kentucky. Geographically, we've got Louisville with 65, and you got Lexington with 75
and 64.
and
64.
64. We're only 90
90 miles
separated. But think of how that
with Cincinnati and going
how
all the
that
way to
travels
Detroit.
down.
Yeah.
You can literally get on one side of Tennessee or the other side of Tennessee and go down from there. So it's a quick, easy place to transverse the
Yeah,
Midwest.
Michigan to Florida, and Texas to New York.
Yeah,
Well, you can go right through Kentucky.
yeah.
Both.
Now
of those.
imagine if the state of Kentucky used that marketing idea to say, hey, Frankfurt's right in between two of the largest interstate systems that you'll ever need. Put your business here. We can't
Put
even
your-
figure that out, but
Within 45 minutes,
gangs
you can
do.
be on your way to every
Right.
major city on the East Coast.
Yeah,
Right?
one day, less than 24 hours, you can.
In
you
less
can
time
touch
than it would take you to eat
70%
lunch.
of the United States.
Yep.
Yeah.
yeah,
Now,
it's crazy.
Carrying this on, a lot of border numbers have been coming out lately, and Eric, you mentioned earlier
Mhm.
the amount of use the federally described term illegal aliens that have crossed the border has dropped ridiculously, unbelievably low.
Mhm.
So, can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, I think Kyle had all the numbers on that, but what was it you said on the number of
So-
interactions
yeah,
was
so
down
in-
to 70? What?
Yeah, in 2024, in March of 2024, right? Just in March, right? They had 189,359.
2024.
March of 2024.
So
180
one year ago.
1 year ago. 189,000, almost 190,000 interactions, right? That people crossing the border essentially and
Well,
having
interactions, that doesn't necessarily mean crossing the border.
It doesn't necessarily mean crossing the border, but
Attempts,
at
at
that
least.
time,
They call them encounters.
right?
Yeah.
At that time, there was nobody on the Mexican side of the border
Right.
and nobody on the Canadian side of the border, so they were crossing.
They
so,
were
I mean,
they were in under the bridges that you saw those photos of.
Mm-hmm.
They were on American soil.
Well, I was wanting to try to compare with that, to keep it as an interaction, because when you get into the numbers for 1 year later,
correct.
then that interaction becomes interesting.
So there was 189,000 in March of 2024. In March of 2025, just 1 year later, there were 7,700. So you're talking a 96, 97% decrease in 1 year, and only of those they only had an arrest for criminal activity of 3 of those. So if
we look at those, to your point, we had 189,000, and we know with a very liberal border policy, the vast majority, if not all,
Correct. They
was an encounter, but they were going to the other side.
right.
They were released into the United States.
Yes.
Almost
Whereas
most of
today, of those 7,700 in March,
Many of them are being stopped at the border.
most
And
of those are
sent
sitting
back.
there.
Yeah, they're
and
being
sent back.
sent back. Yeah, and the
Stay in Mexico. Or,
the El Paso sector was averaging 12,000 a day. Now they're down to single digits a day, and the San Diego sector was averaging 10,000, and they're down to 40 a day. Now, how is that possible? Because you remember President Biden always saying, Congress needs to pass laws, pass laws, pass laws.
Not
And-
one law has been.
And
new law
Republicans
has been
said just
passed.
enforce the laws we got. So Trump put that into action. We haven't passed a single immigration law
It
since
has
Trump
had
been in
ze-
office.
Zero legislative overhead.
Right.
Yeah.
And yet the numbers have dropped dramatically. So what do you think? What do you think the reason was from last year when they say they're begging Congress to pass laws to today?
It all goes back to what we were we were kind of talking about with the gang. How we handle that guy is very critical because courts will use that as precedent. So legally that has to be very careful. And it's the same thing with border policy. Once you set the precedent, look, you're not, no, if you're an asylee, we'll have a conversation. If you're just trying to cross over at some random point, it's a no. And once you enforce that, people aren't coming. They're not coming in droves like they were.
Tom Holman has said, if you're an asylee or if you have a genuine claim
Come
for
to a
protection,
port.
come to a port of entry.
legal port of
Legal
entry.
port of,
legal
port of
port of
entry.
And
And the other thing that a lot of people don't know is that the Border Patrol officers, for years,
Mhm.
have begged for the ability
To enforce.
To enforce. I mean, they have the right to enforce and to arrest and to detain and do all these things. And they were essentially emasculated, and they had all of their powers taken away from them.
Right. When your chain of command is saying
Right.
no, and there's, they don't
all
want
the
to
way up
lose
to-
their jobs.
all the way up to the president.
All the way up to
Right.
the president. They don't want to lose their jobs. They got a family feed too.
Right. And a lot of those men and women live on those borders. They live
Right.
in those
Yes.
border communities. They want to enforce
And
those.
you all are, I guess you all are aware, I'll bring it up and see if you are, the 60-foot border now that I think Teddy Roosevelt enforced back in the day, early 1900s. Now Trump has now brought it back. So we've got active duty military within that 60-foot width that states,
if you
the
have-
liberal states, New Mexico and Arizona can't say, you can't be here.
Yeah.
Right.
So
I mean, if you have semi-automatic weapons pointed at you as opposed to an open door, it's going
Right.
to make a huge difference,
or
right?
or a gun with
Yeah.
no bullets
No
in
bu-
it. You
right.
know there's no bullets
Right.
in
Right.
it. You're just gonna, I give up. Bring me into America and release me.
And,
Never see me again.
and one thing I want to be clear that there's not a misconception for anybody watching this. We're not anti-immigration.
100% not.
Illegal.
I mean, I love just think of how much our country has been enriched because of multicultural influences. Just like most people just come in legal. Everybody wants to leave the word legal or illegal out of the equation when that's everything to do with it.
And what are the people that came here the legal route wanting done with these illegal?
They are
aliens?
wanting them sent back.
And that's why you saw a 40% increase in the vote for President Trump as opposed to years past, because majority of those who are here legally from
Right.
other countries don't want that to happen. And let me just say something else about this aspect that we don't talk a lot about. We let the left talk a lot about it, but we don't push back on it a lot. Jasmine Crockett and others have said this. They've even said this on The View a couple of times, things that really just are mind-blowing. If we had said these things, we'd never have a job ever again.
We'd be canceled.
They say things like, well, who is going to clean your toilet? That
yeah.
famously said by Kelly Osbourne. And now Jasmine Crockett just a few weeks ago says, we're done picking cotton. There's nobody else that's out there, farming, and nobody wants to farm anymore. We need these people to pick your crops. My gosh, that to me
Right.
has such a racial overtone
Well-
that this is not to them. This is not the country of hope and dreams to live the American dream. To them, we need them to come over here to do our subservient work,
Right.
And,
Well, and-
and that's just ludicrous
and
thinking.
The real numbers in California, I saw this somewhere. The real numbers are only 6% of the crops in California are picked by illegals.
right.
94% are picked by Americans, or they're here on work visas,
Right.
whatever it is.
Right.
They're here legally, working in or on the farms in California.
And I know, I know a couple of people that have companies here in our area, and they hire people on work visas.
Yeah,
And I've asked them, why do you not hire, Americans? And unequivocally, the response is, find me some that will work.
yeah.
Yeah.
I had a buddy that I worked with in transportation that lived in Shelby County, and his dad raised hundreds of acres of tobacco, and he built them homes.
Right.
And they were going from season to season, traveling the country. And when it was tobacco harvesting time, they would all bring their families and everything, and they'd move into those homes.
Right.
And work for him until the tobacco was done. Then they'd move on somewhere else.
And this is the pivot that the federal government and state governments need to pivot at this point, is making it better and easier for these companies to get work visas,
Yes.
to do it properly.
Correct.
Because in Shelby County for years, when I was growing up and even in my early professional career, you could pull into Shelby County and pull up to one of the gas stations in the morning, and they'd be hanging out at the gas stations just waiting for one of the farmers to pull up and say, I need 10 of them.
Yeah,
And
day workers.
They'd hop in and they'd go. We need to incentivize and push to get those individuals here legally and do what we can to make that a benefit for them to do that, because there are so many benefits to get them here on a work visa.
Well, and gosh, there's so many things that I want to comment. You talk about Kelly Osmond, who would clean your toilets. What a white privilege thing to say.
Exactly.
So what
She
you're
got
telling me
smoked.
is
it was the mother. But yeah,
No, it was it was Kelly.
No, it was Kelly.
I,
It was
I
Kelly.
distinctly remember it was before Sharon was on there. Kelly was on there
I
first.
thought it was Sharon.
I'm like, what privilege that just says you've hired illegal aliens
Mm-hmm.
to clean your home, and you have never scrubbed a toilet a day in your
Nope.
life
Correct.
Nope.
because you've been fortunate enough to have the means to
Her
pay
daddy,
for it.
Yeah, her daddy
Yeah.
took care of all that.
And then
stuff.
Jasmine Crockett, we're not, but you're spot on it. If we had said, they need to be out there picking cotton,
What-
we would probably be hunted down and executed.
Yeah. I mean, what a terrible thing to say, but I believe, and just like you were saying with why do you have people that denigrate individuals who want to come to our country? We all want people to come to our country because we believe in the American dream. I want somebody to come to this country to pick themselves up and to become a small business owner,
Right.
and whether it's in food industry or service, or whether it's in technology, or whether it's in just owning a small store, whatever it is, I want them to do that, because this, regardless of what anybody will tell you, this is the greatest country in the world. It's the greatest economy in the world. It's the greatest place to live for the benefits and everything that we have. And you cannot argue that. You can try and you can say dumb stuff, but it's the greatest
look how
economy.
fast Canada and Mexico caved when they did all that bold talk. Trump actually did what he said he's going to do, and before the day was out,
Right.
they changed.
Well, it's the really annoying part about it with me is that the same people that are saying we want fair treatment, we want this, we want that, will say, well, if we do this, our prices are going to go up.
Yeah.
So you're okay with things as long as it keeps your price cheap.
Right.
You'll compromise your values for cheap stuff.
Right. Well, and let's be honest, slave labor. I mean, it is no different than what China does.
China's got 1 million Uyghurs,
Yeah.
Muslim slaves,
Yep.
that do all their dirty work, and they don't care if they die in the fields or in the factory or whatever, because there's no safety.
They'll work them to
standards.
death.
Yeah, they work them to death and go get more.
Right.
They don't care, but people don't. People won't read beyond the headline. They won't do any kind of research to see who is actually making your Apple phone or who's making your Nike tennis shoes. You see your NBA players or you see your pro wrestlers
No.
that apologize because somebody in America said the truth, and China gets pissed off, or you see Hollywood kissing China's ass because they want that 1.5 billion people to watch their movies, so they get China's clearance before. You don't never see a Chinese bad guy in a movie no more.
Well, but and I'll say this, and I said it on one of the other segments that we had, but things are happening in China. Things are happening right now. I'm telling you, it was very fast, and all we have to do is sweat them out a little bit longer. Just hold on, because factories are shutting down by the hundreds and thousands a day at this point. Because and people, if you don't have jobs,
there were protests in China last week.
There were
for the first time in forever.
And they want to remove the one person who's in control of this, which is Xi Jinping. And right now, you will have individuals who will come out and they will say everything in China is fine. It's not true, because we know that there are people that are telling us that things are closing. They took the iPhones away from China. They're being 90% of them are being made in India and Indonesia now. Right. And not that the area's a lot better over there, but it's a concerted effort to get less dependent on China. And when you do that, if you don't have jobs and you don't have food, the people will riot. It doesn't matter how much control you have. There are a billion of them.
Right.
And eventually they will rise up.
And India supposedly will be the first country we sign a free trade agreement with, where right now an American car going to India has got 150% tariff on it. So if it costs $10,000, it's going to cost $25,000 in India. That's why there are no American cars in India. But the once we get all this stuff squared away, we're going to have to be patient. This is May. Let's see what it looks like in October, or what it looks like in next January.
Well, and I will also say this, and I know it's very tangentially related to immigration, but our economy is not in the tank. I don't care what anybody says. Year over year, from a year ago, the market's up 7%. Right now, the market futures are down 0.03 for the night. That probably means that it'll go up in the morning.
Yeah.
So within a month, we will be back where we were, and we'll be even greater. And the problem is that 2 years ago, we were year over year from 2 years ago, we're at 26%. The market can't handle that. The market, it has to adjust.
Well, and to kind of wrap things up, what people aren't they're looking at January
right
to now.
Right.
They're not looking and they clearly don't follow the market. They don't have any market knowledge. They're just parroting thoughts.
90% of the people don't have any money in the market.
Right. So if you look from where it counts in November during the election, you see a huge rally in the stock market. Mm-hmm. The prices from January to now have just corrected. We haven't dropped down below where we were before the election. There's a market correction. But I agree, and people you can't look at the stock market in a 3-month lens.
No,
it's
ever.
not. It's not a short. For most Americans, it's not a short-term investment.
Yeah, day traders don't make money.
And year over year over the last 120 years, even with the Great Depression and with the multiple recessions that we've had, the average is almost 10% a year. So it's not things will still
and the
be
number
fine.
that I was always told was there's no 10-year stretch in the history of mankind that the market has not been increased.
Right. And we'll end on this. Stephen A. Smith was interviewed today from ESPN fame, and he they're talking about him running for president. Mm-hmm. He's talking about, he's not denied he won't do it, but he said the problem with the Democrat Party is that they're not, anything they do, anything that Trump does, they're automatically against it. He said U.S. House members and Senate members got the easiest job in the world.
Just say no.
Because all they got, so you saw it.
Yep.
Just say no. And
he had a debate with Officer Tatum, and they discussed that back and forth. It was a great debate, but at the end of the day,
this was on national TV today.
Yeah, and
I think on Jake Tapper on CNN.
Yeah,
and so Eric, you want to take us out on this one?
Yeah, I mean that's pretty much it. I don't really have a whole lot on that one. I do like Tatum. But other than that, I don't really have a whole lot to
Okay,
add
well,
to that one.
I think the key that people will have to with all of this is that immigration affects our economy, and border patrol and border protection protects this nation.
Well, just
and
think
good immigration will benefit this country.
Think how many tens of billions, maybe hundreds of billions we spent on illegal immigration in the last 4 years. How many schools could that build across the United States? Brand new schools for kids that are in hellhole schools.
How much Medicare could it have gone to people, veterans benefits that could have
Right.
helped people with
So
struggling issues.
another topic for another day.
Another topic, another day. Well, that will wrap it up for this episode. We'll see you in another one.
Like, share, and follow our YouTube channel for
Smash that
Pod
like
Course
button.
One.
Smash it.